Kofi learned early in life that some children are born into warm welcome and others into silent regret. The day he entered the world, no drum was beaten in celebration. No songs filled the air. Only the exhausted gasp of his mother and the heavy silence of a village already too poor to smile at a new mouth to feed. Their home was a small mud hut at the farthest end of the village, the side people rarely visited unless they were lost. The roof leaked when the rains came, and the wind that pushed through the cracked walls made every night feel like a battle against the cold. But that was the home his mother, a Joe, fought to keep standing. Kofi never knew his father's face, only the shape of his absence. The man had vanished before Kofi was 2 years old, chasing rumors of quick money in the city. When it became clear he was not coming back, people spoke of him as though he had died, except no one ever prayed for his soul. "Your father left because of you," older children spat at Kofi when they passed him by the dusty road. "You are bad luck." Others whispered that his family was cursed. How else could someone be born into struggle after struggle, as though suffering was stitched into their skin? Yet even as a small boy, Kofi's eyes carried something different, a spark that refused to die. When he wandered through the village, he watched everything: the way chickens scratched the earth, the way mothers tied their babies to their backs, the way the sun sank behind the hills each evening and left a glowing trail of fire in the sky. He looked not like a child who accepted his world, but one who was trying to read it. A Joe noticed this too. "You think too much," she would say gently as she kneaded dough for the next day's market sale. "Thinking is dangerous in a place like this." But Kofi couldn't stop imagining more, a bigger world beyond the cracked horizon, where he didn't have to fight for every grain of rice. School was supposed to be the path to that world, but reality had other plans. His family could barely afford a single notebook, so Kofi wrote tiny, careful letters to conserve every piece of paper. His uniform was a patchwork of old clothes stitched together by his mother's tired hands. Some days the hunger gnawed at his belly so viciously that he couldn't sit still in class. One afternoon, he fainted, head hitting the classroom floor. When he woke up, he was lying under a mango tree, the leaves swaying above him like they were laughing. The other children pointed and laughed in real life too. "See, he can't even handle studying. He should just stay home. He is finished already." Only one year, the school teacher, knelt beside him and helped him drink water. She had kind eyes, the kind that looked at a child and saw a future instead of a burden. "You are not finished, Kofi," she whispered. "You are just beginning. You have a gift, do you know that?" Kofi shook his head. What gift could a boy like him possibly have? "You see stories everywhere," she said. "Your essays, even when the words are few, they speak loudly." That night, he asked his mother, "Mama, do stories matter?" Joe stared into the tiny cooking fire before answering. "Stories don't fill stomachs. They don't patch roofs. They don't stop the hunger." She paused, then added quietly, "But maybe stories can take you away from all this, even if just in your mind." Kofi considered her words as he lay on the woven mat he shared with his siblings. As the wind slid through the cracks of their home, he closed his eyes and let his imagination build walls no storm could break. He dreamed of newspapers, of books, of microphones pointed at him, but when he woke, the dream always slipped away like water through his fingers. The village kept reminding him who he was, nobody. Every morning he carried buckets of water from the well, walked miles barefoot, and worked in fields until his fingers blistered. His mother did everything she could, but the burden of survival weighed down the entire household. Still, on some nights when no one was watching, Kofi wrote, not with a pen, but with a small stick in the dirt outside their house. Words that the wind erased every night, but he didn't mind. He told the sky his stories, he told the earth his dreams. One evening, as he scribbled a scene under the moon's dim light, his older cousin Kwame walked by and kicked dust over his work. "Stop wasting time," Kwame barked. "Do you think anyone cares what you write?" He jabbed a finger into Kofi's chest. "Boys like us are born to suffer. Accept it." Kofi stared down at the erased words, his heart pounding not from fear, but from anger so deep it shook him. That night he made a silent promise to himself, "I will not let this be the end of my story. I will not die in this village." But promises are easier to make than to keep. As he prepared to sleep, a storm of doubt tried to drown his ambition. What if they were right? What if dreams were only for the children born with shoes on their feet? What if the world had already decided he didn't matter? His imagination, once a soft, comforting friend, now felt like a cruel tease. And yet, deep inside, a small flame refused to go out. A voice inside whispered, "One day, they will know my name. One day, the world will listen." Kofi didn't know how or when, but he knew one thing for certain: he would rise. Great! Continuing the story now. And thank you for the reminder. I will not use that symbol you asked me to avoid. Here is Chapter 1, Part 2 Chapter 1, The Forgotten Child Part 2. Morning in the village always began with noise. Roosters crowing, goats bleating, mothers calling their children, the clang of buckets striking the inside of the well. But in Kofi's home, the day began with silence. His mother rose before the first bird dared to sing and stepped outside quietly, careful not to wake her children. She needed those few minutes alone to breathe before reality stormed in. On this morning, Kofi woke early too. Hunger sometimes did that to him. His belly was a drum played by an impatient musician. He rubbed his eyes and grabbed the small bucket beside their door. "I'm going to fetch water," he told his mother, who stood by the fire lighting a small pot. "Be careful," she replied. She didn't have to say more. Every mother in the village held fear like a stone in her chest. The world was not kind to boys who had nothing. The walk to the well took nearly an hour. The path wound through fields of dry grass and patches of stubborn weeds that refused to die. When Kofi reached the well, a long line of villagers stood waiting, each with larger buckets and stronger bodies. He stood quietly at the end, hoping no one would notice him. But hope was rarely enough. A group of boys older and taller than him stepped aside, pretending to be generous. They gestured for Kofi to go ahead. He hesitated, but the fake smiles fooled him. As he leaned over to lower the bucket, one boy shoved him from behind. He stumbled hard, the bucket slipping, falling into the well with a splash that echoed like laughter. The boys roared, clutching their bellies. "Look at him! Even a bucket doesn't want to go home with him. You are cursed, Kofi. Even water runs from you." Kofi felt heat rise behind his eyes. But tears were a luxury he couldn't afford in public. Crying only gave them more ammunition. So he wiped his face and walked back home empty-handed. When his mother saw the missing bucket, her jaw tightened. She didn't scold him. She didn't have the energy. She simply took her head wrap off, tied it tight, and left. She walked all the way to the well herself. Kofi sat on the floor outside, staring at his hands. The tremble in them exposed everything he hid. He whispered to himself, as though the earth needed to hear him. "One day, they will remember this moment. One day you will see." Later at school, as the sun climbed high and burned everything it touched, the students gathered in a small, dusty classroom. Their wooden desks were crooked, cracked, and too few, so Kofi shared his with two others. oThe, their teacher, stood tall and spoke with passion that made even the birds outside pause their songs. She believed deeply in education, even though she taught in a place where dreams were laughed at. She called on Kofi to read his assignment. His heart pounded. Reading in front of others meant giving them more chances to mock him. But oThe smiled at him in a way that said she believed in his tongue even when he did not. Kofi opened his tiny notebook, its pages wrinkled and smudged, and began reading. His story was about a bird with broken wings that still tried to fly. The class listened silently, some out of surprise, others out of curiosity. Even the loudest boys from the well fell quiet. When he finished, oThe tapped the desk softly. "That was beautiful," she said. "You have a voice that deserves to be heard." Kofi swallowed hard. Compliments were not normal in his life. They felt too heavy, like he didn't know how to hold them. oThe continued, "Do not let this world silence you." But the world tried, quickly. After class, the same boys cornered him behind the school building. "So you think you're better than us now?" the leader sneered. "You think stories make you special?" another hissed. Without warning, a fist caught Kofi's cheek. The ground rushed up to meet him. Dust filled his mouth. They kicked until his ribs screamed, and then they walked away laughing. Kofi lay there a long time, staring up at the sky that seemed far too bright for how cold he felt. He pressed his hand against his side where pain bloomed like fire. He whispered one word, "Why?" Not to the boys, not to the sky, not even to his father who vanished long ago. He asked life itself, why must some children crawl while others were born running? That night, as he lay awake on the mat, his sister Abina noticed his silence. Kofi, she whispered, what happened? He closed his eyes and forced a smile she could not see. Nothing worth remembering. But Abina was no fool. She took his hand carefully, like it was made of glass. One day, she whispered, the world will know you are worth something. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight with wounds no eyes could see. When the moon climbed high, casting silver light into their cracked home, Kofi sat up slowly. Pain shot through his ribs, but he ignored it. He picked up a small piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper oThe had given him. He wrote, they think pain is a cage, but it is a key, it will unlock everything. One day he stared at the words. A breeze slipped through the wall and touched his cheek like a mother's hand. And the flame inside him grew. He was still invisible to the world, but he had begun to see himself. Sparkles. End of Part 2. Part 3 coming soon, continuing through the hardships leading to his turning point. Would you like me to continue with Part 3 of Chapter 1 now? Absolutely, continuing right away. Here is Chapter 1, Part 3. Chapter 1, The Forgotten Child. Part 3. Weeks passed, but the pain in Kofi's ribs lingered like a stubborn reminder that the world didn't want him to rise. Every cough felt like a knife twisting inside him. Still, he woke up before dawn each day, not because he wasn't hurting, but because hunger was a louder pain. The little food they had was divided carefully. His mother and older siblings pretended they weren't hungry so the younger ones could eat. Kofi noticed. He always noticed. Sometimes he found himself staring at other families, ones with fathers who carried home sacks of maize or meat from the market. The boys in those families ran freely, laughed loudly. Their mothers smiled. Why did his family receive struggle while others received joy? One evening, Kofi approached his mother while she washed clothes by the stream. The water was cold and full of stones, but she scrubbed as though she could wash the hardship out of their lives. Mama, he asked quietly, do you ever wish you had a different child instead of me? Joe stopped scrubbing. She looked up slowly. Her hands were wet and wrinkled from years of sacrifice. My son, she said, I wish only for one thing, that you survive this life. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. His mother never spoke of dreams. Survival was the highest hope she allowed herself. He nodded and helped her with the washing until the stars lit up the sky. Though she would never admit it, Joe feared for her son, feared that his dreams were too bright for a world that punished brightness. School was his sanctuary, but even their reality followed him. His shoes were worn thin at the soles, and when he walked, rocks stabbed through like sharp teeth. His uniform grew smaller as he grew taller, sleeves ending before his wrists, trousers hovering above his ankles. His teacher oThe noticed. Kofi, she said one afternoon, stay a moment after class. His heart raced. Usually being called after class meant trouble, but her expression was gentle. She opened a drawer, pulled out a notebook new and clean, with lined pages waiting for a voice, and placed it in his hands. This is for you, she said. Write every thought, every dream, every story. Kofi stared at the notebook like it was a treasure chest. I cannot pay for this, he whispered. You will, oThe said with a wink. One day, when the world knows your name. He held the notebook close as he walked home. Every few steps he opened it just to touch the pages again, to make sure it was real. That night, he wrote until his eyes grew too heavy to stay open. He wrote about the sky. He wrote about hunger. He wrote about dreams that chased him even when he wished they would stop. He wrote about the boy he hoped to become. But dreams are fuel for disaster in a place where hope is seen as arrogance. The villagers began to notice his small spark. Why does he pretend to be better than us? Some muttered. He writes stories while others work. He is useless, others spat. Envy mixed with fear. People often resented those who dared to want more. One afternoon, as he walked home, an older man blocked his path. I hear you want to be famous, the man sneered, his voice thick with mockery. Tell me, will fame put food in your mother's pot? Will it bring your father back? Kofi's throat tightened. No sir, he said quietly. Then stop this nonsense, the man snapped. Success is not for boys like you. Kofi lowered his gaze, the words slashing into him deeper than any punch. When he reached home, he climbed the small hill behind their hut and sat beneath a crooked tree. From there, he could see the entire village, the cracked roofs, the smoky fires, the world that wanted to keep him small. He pressed his hand over his ribs. The bruises were fading, but the hurt inside was growing heavier. He opened the notebook and wrote, maybe they are right, maybe I am trying to build wings out of broken bones. The wind sighed through the grass, as though disagreeing. He looked at his words again and slowly added, but wings are still wings even when they hurt. His handwriting shook, but the determination did not. He closed the book, stood up, and whispered, one day I will leave this place and when I return they will know my name. The tree stood silent but strong behind him, a witness to a promise the world wasn't ready for. That night, as darkness wrapped itself around the village, Kofi lay awake listening to the sound of his siblings breathing. His stomach twisted with hunger and fear, but the flame inside him burned brighter than both. He didn't have shoes for the future. He didn't have money. He didn't even have hope that came easy. But he had words. He had pain. And he had a fire that no one could take from him. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when. But he knew this, he would rise, no matter who tried to bury him. Sparkles. End of Part 3. Part 4 will continue deeper into Kofi's final struggles in childhood, leading to the moment he decides to leave the village, the turning point of the chapter. Would you like me to proceed with Part 4 now? Absolutely, continuing right away. Here is Chapter 1, Part 4. Chapter 1, The Forgotten Child. Part 4. Seasons changed in the village, but Kofi's circumstances did not. Rain or sun, hunger remained a quiet enemy that never slept. He grew taller, but his clothes grew smaller, stretched thin over a body forged by struggle. His eyes, though, remained sharp and restless. One evening, a storm rolled in from the horizon. The clouds were heavy, like they were carrying the weight of every sorrow Kofi had ever felt. Thunder cracked across the sky as if the heavens were tearing themselves apart. Rain hammered the village without mercy. Water poured through the broken roof of their home, soaking their mat and dripping onto their heads. Kofi and his siblings scrambled to place old bowls and pots beneath the leaks, but there were too many. The floor turned muddy beneath their bare feet. Jo tried to patch the roof with her hands, her face tight with frustration and exhaustion. Mama, let me help, Kofi said. No, she snapped without meaning to. Then softer, no my son, go inside. I will manage. But he couldn't stand to watch her fight alone. He climbed onto the small stool and tried to hold part of the roof covering in place. The wind ripped it free like it was nothing. In that moment, a flash of lightning lit the room, exposing everything they tried so hard to hide from the world, the brokenness of their home, the emptiness of their cupboard, the hopelessness carved into his mother's tired eyes. When the storm finally calmed, the village smelled of wet soil and despair. Kofi lay awake shivering, thinking, if I do nothing, this is the life we will drown in. The next day, he gathered his courage and went to see oThe. She was sweeping the dusty classroom when he arrived. Kofi, she said with her warm smile, you look troubled. Tell me what weighs on you. His voice wavered. Miss, I want to help my family, but I do not know how. I have nothing to offer. oThe set her broom aside and sat with him. You have a gift, she said. Your words, they are powerful, but no one listens, he replied. One day, they will. But for now, she continued, you must keep writing, keep learning. Education will give you the tools to build the life you dream of. Kofi wanted to believe her, but hunger argued louder. What if I cannot wait for one day, he whispered, his voice cracking. oThe studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and took out a small loaf of bread. She placed it gently in his hands. Kofi, she said, when you feel like giving up, remember this. Even a seed buried in darkness will rise if it has the courage to push through the soil. He looked at the bread. To anyone else, it was just food. To him, it felt like hope made visible. He carried it home carefully, tearing it into small pieces so everyone could have a taste. His sisters chewed slowly, savoring every crumb. That night, he wrote, the world gives me little but I will turn that little into everything. Months passed. Hunger grew sharper. His mother worked harder. The bullies became crueler. And school fees were coming due. Jo called him aside one evening, her expression heavy. Kofi, she said quietly, we cannot afford to send you to school anymore. Her words struck him with more force than any punch he had taken. No, mama, please. She placed her hand on his shoulder. You are needed here. You must help us survive. Survive. That word again. A cage disguised as a goal. His dream, once a flickering candle, felt smothered. That night, Kofi walked alone to the hill behind the village, the same place where he always went to think. The stars stared down like distant witnesses. He looked at the village below, a place that never believed in him. And then he made a decision that terrified him. I am leaving, he whispered. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Soon, he would go to the city. He would find work. He would write when the world slept. He would make his name known. He pressed his notebook to his chest like a shield. If I stay here I will drown. If I leave I might fly. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a door. And he had found the courage to knock. When he returned home, Abina was waiting for him at the doorway. You were gone long, she said softly. I was thinking, Kofi replied. She nodded, studying him. You are planning something, she whispered. Kofi didn't answer, but the fire in his eyes told the truth. Abina squeezed his hand. Wherever you go, she said, do not forget us. Never, he promised. He had no money, no contacts, no map, no guarantee of tomorrow. Only a dream, only a hunger stronger than fear. In the silence of the night, he packed his notebook and a few pieces of dry bread into a small cloth bag. Then he stared into the darkness outside their home. The darkness stared back. He stepped toward it anyway. Sparkles. End of part 4. Kofi is now on the edge of his greatest leap, leaving everything behind in search of a new life. Part 5 will conclude Chapter 1 with his departure and the emotional consequences of that choice. Would you like me to continue with Part 5 now? Of course, continuing now. And yes, I am avoiding the symbol you asked me not to use. Here is Chapter 1, Part 5, the conclusion of the first chapter. Chapter 1, The Forgotten Child. Part 5. The night before he planned to leave, Kofi barely slept. Every sound felt louder in the darkness. The creak of the wind against the roof, the soft breathing of his siblings, the heartbeat pounding in his own ears. Was he truly brave enough to walk away from everything he had ever known? Or was he a fool chasing a dream too big to hold before dawn? He rose quietly and walked outside. The air was cold, the kind of cold that wakes every doubt inside you. He looked back at their small hut. The walls were cracked. The door leaned to one side like it was tired of standing. Inside, his family slept, unaware that the world as they knew it was about to change. His hands trembled as he picked up his small cloth bag. He knelt near his mother and whispered, "Forgive me, Mama. One day, I will return and the world will be different." He kissed the top of Abina's head and gently brushed the hair from his little brother Kaho's eyes. A tear fell before he could stop it. Then, with the courage borrowed from every moment he had survived, he stepped outside. The village was quiet in the early morning. Even the roosters were still deciding whether the sun was worth waking for. Kofi walked quickly through narrow paths lined with mud huts and dreams long buried. At the edge of the village, he paused. Behind him was everything he knew. Ahead was everything he wanted. He took a step forward. One step became two. Two became many. And the village faded behind him like a memory the world tried to forget. His feet ached on the hard road. The dust rose with each stride, clinging to his legs like the past refusing to let go. The path to the city was long and uncertain. He had heard stories of people disappearing along the way. Stories of thieves. Stories of hunger worse than anything he had known. But stories had never frightened him. Stories were fuel. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, burning the back of his neck. His throat dried, his bread ran out too quickly, but he kept walking. Every step was a sentence he refused to erase. By midday, he reached a crossroads where a lone mango tree stood. He sat beneath its shade, wiping sweat from his forehead. His legs trembled from exhaustion. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "Courage is not the absence of fear, it is walking while fear follows behind." He read the words again. They gave him strength. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Kofi. He turned in shock. Standing a few steps away was Abina. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath from running. "You really thought you would leave without saying goodbye properly?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "I wanted to spare you more pain," he whispered. "That is not how family works," she said. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small fabric pouch. "Mama wanted to give you this." Kofi's heart dropped. "She is awake?" he asked, dread filling him. "Yes," Abina said softly, "and she is crying." Kofi looked down at the pouch. Inside were a few coins. Not much, but enough to buy bread and water for a day or two. "Mama said you will need it," Abina continued. "She said a child who dreams is never useless." Kofi swallowed hard. "Did she say anything else?" he asked. Abina nodded. "She said to tell you that the world is not kind. But you are stronger than the world." Kofi tried to speak but his voice failed. Tears slid down his cheek. Abina wrapped her arms around him. Go, she whispered. Do not look back. Kofi hugged her tight, then stepped away before his heart changed his mind. He turned toward the road again. Abina called out one last time. Kofi, make the world hear you. He nodded and kept walking. He did not look back. By evening, the city's silhouette finally appeared far in the distance. Lights flickered like stars fallen to earth. Cars hummed. The future waited. Kofi stopped for a moment, taking in the sight. He had left his childhood behind. Ahead of him stood a world that did not care whether he rose or fell. He placed a hand over his heart and whispered the promise he had lived his whole life for. One day the world will know my name. The sun dipped behind him, leaving his past in darkness. And Kofi walked forward into the glow of a new beginning. Sparkles. End of chapter 1. Sparkles. Word count so far, thousands of words completed. Tone, established as dark but hopeful. Kofi's journey has truly begun. Are you ready for chapter 2? Climbing the impossible. 10,000 words, delivered in multiple parts as well. If so, just reply, yes. Start chapter 2. Perfect, we begin the next major stage of Kofi's journey. Here is chapter 2, Climbing the Impossible. Part 1. Chapter 2, Climbing the Impossible. Part 1. The city greeted Kofi not with opportunities, but with chaos. Cars honked like angry geese, people rushed past him like he was invisible, and buildings stretched so high that the sky seemed trapped between them. The air tasted of smoke and noise. Kofi stood at the edge of the busy road, clutching his small cloth bag, wishing he looked less like a boy who had just escaped a village. His clothes, dusted in red earth, made people glance at him with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He stepped forward carefully, trying not to get in anyone's way. But the city had no patience for hesitation. A man bumped into him so hard that Kofi stumbled and nearly fell. Watch where you are going, the man snapped before disappearing into the crowd. Kofi swallowed the reply that rose in his throat. He was alone here. He could not afford enemies. He wondered until his legs shook. The coins his mother had given him felt heavier with every minute, not because of their weight, but because he knew they would vanish quickly if he was not careful. By late afternoon, he found a small bakery stall. The warm smell wrapped around him like a cruel temptation. He approached the vendor and whispered, please, a small loaf. The vendor eyed his dirty clothes, his desperate eyes. But money was money. The man handed him a piece of bread. Kofi took the smallest possible bite, letting the sweetness rest on his tongue before swallowing. He needed to make it last. He sat on a sidewalk, watching the world move too fast. Everyone here seemed to be going somewhere important. He, meanwhile, had nowhere at all to go. Nightfall arrived like a thief. The temperature dropped sharply, and Kofi shivered. He searched for a place that didn't feel dangerous. He found a small corner beside an abandoned shop, curled up with his bag under his head, and hugged his notebook tightly against his chest. He thought of his mother's hands, rough but loving. He thought of Abina's voice telling him to make the world hear him. He thought of Kaho's tiny laugh. For the first time since leaving, he felt true fear. The kind that squeezes your heart until breathing hurts. I will not fail, he whispered into the cold night. I cannot. The city did not whisper back. Morning arrived with footsteps and voices. A boy around Kofi's age nudged him with a toe. Hey new boy, are you alive? Kofi sat up quickly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The boy laughed. He wore torn clothes but his smile was wide, confident. He carried a tray filled with shoe polish and brushes. You look worse than me and that is hard to do, the boy joked. My name is oThe. You Kofi, he answered softly. Well Kofi, oThe said, if you want to survive here, you cannot sleep where the police pass. They will chase you away faster than a goat from a yam field. Kofi nodded, embarrassed. oThe looked at him more closely. You are from the villages, right? Yes. oThe grinned. I knew it. We can smell each other. Fresh like farm soil. Kofi forced a small smile. You looking for work? oThe asked. Yes, Kofi said. Anything. The city boy's grin widened. Then come. I will show you how to make money the honest way. oThe led him through crowded streets to a busy market area filled with noise and color. They stopped near a shoe-shining corner. You learn fast or you starve, oThe said, handing him a brush and polish. People only care about your work, not your story. Customers came and went. Some ignored Kofi completely. Others gave him shoes but stared at him like a tool, not a person. Still, he worked. His fingers ached, his back burned, but he kept going. With each coin he earned, hope flickered. By evening, oThe clapped him on the back. You did good. Not bad for a village boy. Kofi pocketed his tiny earnings and whispered, thank you. Do not thank me yet, oThe replied. Surviving one day means nothing unless you survive the next two. Those words lodged themselves in Kofi's mind. That night, Kofi and oThe found shelter beneath a bridge. The noise of passing cars echoed above them as they lay on cardboard sheets. The city looked different from here, less magical, more real. Kofi opened his notebook and wrote, the city does not care if you live or die, but I do. I will live, I will rise. oThe peeked over. What are you writing? My future, Kofi answered. oThe raised a brow. You talk like someone who came here to do big things. I did, Kofi said, voice steady. The city lights reflected in his eyes like tiny sparks. And I will. oThe chuckled, but not in mockery, in curiosity. I believe you, Kofi, he said quietly, but the climb is steep. Kofi nodded. Then I will climb. Even if his hands bled, even if his heart broke, even if the world tried to crush him, he would climb. Sparkles. End of Chapter 2 Part 1. Part 2 will push deeper into the reality of street life, hunger, danger, betrayal, and the spark that keeps Kofi writing. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 now? Absolutely, we continue. Here is Chapter 2, Part 2 Chapter 2. Climbing the impossible. Part 2. Days became weeks, and the city carved itself into Kofi's bones. He learned how to move through crowds without being stepped on, how to shine shoes fast enough to please customers but careful enough not to get yelled at. He learned the locations of every street vendor who might give a leftover scrap of food if he smiled politely. But some lessons were harder. One afternoon, Kofi and oThe set up their shoe-shining spot near a popular restaurant. Business was slow. People walked by in elegant clothes, too proud to look down at boys from the street. oThe nudged Kofi. We go to the buses. Travelers pay better. They packed up and moved, weaving through streets until they reached the bus station. Dust swirled as people rushed in every direction, shouting for seats, dragging suitcases, hugging relatives goodbye. oThe hurried toward a businessman stepping off a bus. Sir, let me clean your shoes, you will look sharp for your meeting. The man frowned but relented. Kofi took another customer, a woman with a heavy bag. As he scrubbed, his stomach twisted painfully. He had barely eaten since morning. He tried to ignore it and worked faster. Suddenly, a policeman approached them, voice booming, you children cannot work here. Move or I take you in. oThe muttered under his breath but obeyed quickly. They grabbed their things and ran as fast as they could. They ducked into a narrow alley, breathless. oThe slammed his hand against the wall. These people, they do not let us live. Kofi placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. We will find another place. But before they could leave, a group of older boys appeared at the end of the alley. Street boys, rough, desperate, merciless. Their leader smirked. You two are new here. You pay to work in this area. oThe stepped forward. We have no money to pay you. And this is not your place. The older boy's smile vanished. He pushed oThe so hard he fell. Kofi froze. He wanted to run, but he didn't. Stop, Kofi said. His voice trembled, but he stood his ground. The bully turned to him, surprised. What did you say? I said stop. The alley seemed to shrink with silence. Then the older boy shoved Kofi to the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder. oThe jumped up and kicked the boy in the shins, surprising him. That was enough to make the gang lose interest. With a final sneer, they left. oThe limped to Kofi and helped him stand. You are crazy, he hissed. Brave, but crazy. Kofi brushed dust from his shirt. We cannot let people treat us like animals. oThe stared at him for a moment, then laughed. You talk like a leader. That night under the bridge, Kofi lay awake. His body hurt. Hunger gnawed. His hope flickered. But when he looked at the city lights, something inside him blazed brighter. He opened his notebook and wrote, even lions starve before they hunt. I will not starve forever. The next morning, oThe shook him awake. Come, there is a man hiring boys at the port. Hard work, good pay. Kofi didn't hesitate. They walked for nearly an hour until they reached the docks. Ships towered above them like floating buildings. Men shouted orders as crates were moved. The boss, a burly man with a voice sharp as a whip, looked them over. You work hard, you get paid, he said. You slow down, you get out. Kofi and oThe nodded. The work was brutal, carrying sacks heavier than their bodies, splinters slicing into their palms, sweat burning their eyes. By midday, Kofi thought his spine might break, but he did not stop. He remembered Mama's tears. He remembered Abina's last whispered dream. He remembered Kaho's smile. So he lifted another sack, and another. The boss watched him with mild amazement. "You are small," he said, "but fire inside is big." Kofi didn't know if it was a compliment, but he held onto it like gold. When they received their wages that evening, Kofi stared at the money in disbelief. Not much, but enough for food and maybe a blanket to guard against the cold. oThe grinned. "We are rich for today," Kofi said. They laughed, really laughed, for the first time in a long while. Later, as they sat under the bridge eating fried plantain, oThe asked, "Kofi, what did you want to be before you came here? Before the hunger, before the streets?" Kofi wiped his hands on his trousers. "A writer," he whispered. "I want my words to reach the world. I want people to hear stories like mine, stories from the ground." oThe looked at him thoughtfully. "Then maybe one day," he said, "you will write our story too." Kofi smiled for the first time in days. "I already am," he replied. He gazed out at the restless city and felt something bloom inside him, fierce and unstoppable, not hope, determination. He was not just surviving anymore. He was climbing, higher and higher, toward the impossible. Sparkles. End of Chapter 2 Part 2. Would you like me to proceed with Part 3 of the chapter? Of course, we continue with the most intense part of this chapter. Here is Chapter 2, Part 3 Chapter 2, Climbing the Impossible. Part 3. Weeks passed like storms, harsh, unpredictable, and never gentle. But Kofi endured each one. Every day at the port left him sore, but each coin in his pocket reminded him he was fighting poverty with his own hands. Still, the city always waited for a moment of weakness. One Saturday evening, after a long day hauling crates, Kofi and oThe walked to a small stand where a kind old woman sometimes sold leftover porridge cheaply. The scent of food drifted toward them like a promise. Kofi was already imagining the taste when a shout split the air. "Police! Run!" Street vendors scattered. Bowls clattered to the ground. oThe grabbed Kofi's arm. "They do not want boys like us here," he said. "Move!" They sprinted, breath sharp in their lungs. Kofi tripped, but oThe dragged him back up. They dodged a policeman's reach by inches and escaped into a narrow alley. Panting, they leaned against a wall. Kofi's stomach twisted. The hunger returned, more painful because hope had been so close. oThe looked frustrated. "It is like every door they shut in our faces." Kofi stared at his empty hands. "One day, they will open." But deep inside, a fear whispered, "What if they never do?" A few nights later, as they settled beneath the bridge, Kofi discovered something terrible. His notebook was gone. He searched frantically through his bag. His heart hammered as he dug through every pocket. "No notebook. No, no, no," he whispered. "It cannot be gone." oThe sat up. "What is wrong? My notebook. All my writing. My dreams. Everything." oThe jumped to his feet. "When did you last see it?" Kofi's mind spun. "At the port. I had it when we finished work." That meant someone might have taken it, or thrown it away. His throat tightened. Tears pricked his eyes, not from pain, but from loss, the deepest kind. That notebook carried every word he believed would shape his future. oThe clenched his fists. "We will find it tomorrow." But Kofi could not sleep, not when an entire piece of his soul was missing. At dawn, they rushed to the port. The boss was shouting instructions as usual. Workers moved in frantic patterns. Kofi's eyes darted everywhere, searching corners, crates, the dirt. Nothing. Minutes turned into an hour. A cold heaviness settled in his chest. Then he saw something. A boy smaller than him sat on a crate, flipping through a notebook, his notebook. Kofi's heart leaped in anger and relief. He marched toward the boy. "That is mine," he said. The younger boy clutched the notebook to his chest. "Finders keepers." Kofi reached for it gently. "Please, those words are my life." The boy's lower lip trembled, but he did not release his grip. "Everyone here takes from me," he whispered. "Every day. And nobody cares." Kofi froze. He saw himself hungry, scared, hurting, reflected in this stranger's eyes. He exhaled slowly. "I know what it is like to have nothing. But this notebook, it is the only thing that keeps me believing I can be more than a street boy." The boy hesitated, then extended the notebook. Take it, he said quietly. Maybe you will make it. Maybe you will show the world we exist. Kofi's voice shook. Thank you. He pressed a coin, one of his precious few, into the boy's hand. For food, Kofi said. No one should starve where dreams are being born. The boy stared at the coin in disbelief, then nodded once and slipped away. oThe walked up beside Kofi. You are really going to be someone, he murmured. I can feel it. That night, Kofi wrote more than he ever had before. His words burned. Hunger sharpens the dream, pain fuels the climb. Even when the world steals from me, I will rise. oThe peered over his shoulder. What is that about us, Kofi said. This climb, this fight. oThe smirked. Write it big then. People must hear us from the bottom of the ladder. Kofi lifted his pen and pressed harder. He would write until his story reached homes far beyond the bridge. He would write until the world learned that village boys mattered. He would write until every closed door had a crack of light. Because he was Kofi. And Kofi was climbing. Even if the climb tore his hands. Even if the climb broke his heart. He knew someday he would reach the top. And shout his name loud enough for his village, and the whole world, to hear. Sparkles. End of chapter 2. Next, chapter 3, The Rise of a Voice. Before I begin writing the final chapter, I'd like one quick choice from you. What kind of success should Kofi ultimately achieve? A. He becomes a famous writer whose story inspires millions. B. He becomes a well-known speaker / advocate for street children. C. He becomes a business leader who helps rebuild his village. D. A powerful combination, writer and advocate and returning hero. Which ending feels right for Kofi's journey? Perfect. Kofi will rise as a famous writer whose words shape the world. We now begin the final chapter. Here is chapter 3, The Rise of a Voice. Part 1 - Chapter 3, The Rise of a Voice. Part 1. Years passed, but the memories of hunger, cold nights, and the bridge never left Kofi. He carried them like invisible scars, reminders of where he came from and why he could never stop climbing. He worked at the port by day and wrote by night. His notebook filled with poems, stories, and pieces of truth shaped from pain. oThe often teased him, calling him the future president of words, but Kofi never laughed at that dream. He believed in it. One evening, tired from lifting crates, Kofi sat in a quiet corner of the docks, scribbling ideas for a new story about a boy who survived the streets. The boss approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. You always writing, the man said. What is so important in that book? Kofi hesitated, then handed over a few loose pages. The boss skimmed them. His rough expression softened a little. You write like you have lived 10 lives, he murmured. There is a newspaper office not far from here. They hire smart people, sometimes. Maybe go there. Show them this. Kofi's heart stumbled in his chest. You think they will listen to me? The boss shrugged. No idea. But if you do not try, you will never know. Hope flickered. Dangerous, beautiful. The next week, on his only day off, Kofi wore his cleanest shirt, still dusty, still worn, and walked to the address the boss had given him. The building stood tall and proud, with big windows he was afraid to touch. At the entrance, a security guard blocked his path, eyeing him with annoyance. What do you want? I have writing. I want to show someone, Kofi said, trying to sound older, braver. The guard laughed. Boy, go home. This is not a place for street children. Kofi's chest tightened. The same wall he had hit 1,000 times was here again. Disbelief, rejection, judgment. But before he could turn away, a woman stepped out of the door. She had glasses perched on her nose and a stack of papers in her arms. What is happening here? The guard huffed. This boy thinks he is a writer. Kofi looked at the woman and lifted his notebook with trembling hands. Please, he said, just read one page. One. She studied his face, not his clothes, not his dirt, but the fire in his eyes. Give it to me, she said. Kofi handed her the notebook. Each second felt like a heartbeat too loud. She read in silence. Her eyes slowed, then widened. When she looked up, her voice was different. These words, she whispered, they cut straight into the heart. Kofi swallowed hard. Because they came from mine. The woman smiled, a real, warm smile. My name is Miss Amma. Come with me. Inside the office, Kofi felt tiny among desks and typewriters. Miss Amma guided him to a chair opposite an editor, a serious-looking man with silver hair. This boy, she said, has something special. The editor raised a doubtful brow. But Miss Amma handed him the notebook. He began reading. The room grew quieter. His stern face softened. When he finally looked up, he asked Kofi, "You wrote all of this?" "Yes, sir." "And you want the world to read your story?" Kofi nodded. The editor leaned back, tapping the pages. "I cannot promise you a career. I cannot promise money. But I can give you one chance." One chance. Those two words felt like a door cracking open in the darkness. "We will print one of your stories in the paper next week," he said. "If people like it, we continue." Kofi's breath caught in his throat. He bowed his head, voice shaking. "Thank you, sir." As he left the office, clutching his notebook to his chest, he felt the city differently, not as a monster trying to swallow him, but as a mountain he was finally beginning to climb. Ato waited outside, sitting on a curb. When Kofi told him what happened, Ato whooped so loud that birds flew from the trees. "I told you," he laughed, clapping Kofi's back. "I told you that you are more than this city's dust." Kofi smiled, tears warming his eyes. He wasn't at the top yet, but he finally had a ladder. And tomorrow, the world would read his first step. Sparkles. End of Chapter 3 Part 1. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 right now? Of course, we continue the final chapter. Here is Chapter 3, Part 2. Chapter 3, The Rise of a Voice. Part 2. The newspaper hit the streets the next Monday morning. Kofi and Ato rushed to the nearest vendor booth, breathless and anxious. Kofi had never seen his words printed before. They no longer hid in his notebook, they lived in ink. There it was. Title: The Boy Under the Bridge. Author: Kofi M. His heart punched against his ribs. Ato practically danced. "You are famous already," he declared. Kofi laughed, shaking his head. Not yet. But a seed of belief grew inside him. That week, everything changed. People who once ignored the shoeshine boys now glanced twice at Kofi. Some asked if he was that writer from the paper. Others brought extra coins for a shine and said they liked his story. Kofi felt pride, but also confusion. Fame felt unreal. One afternoon, Miss Amma met him outside the newspaper office. "The letters are pouring in," she said. "Readers love you. Some cried reading your story. You have a gift, Kofi." Kofi blinked. "People cried." Miss Amma nodded. "Your words remind them that the children they step over every day have dreams and hearts." Her voice tightened with emotion. "I want you to write more. Not just stories, truth." Truth. Kofi had plenty of that. But the climb never came without cuts. Some street boys resented him. "You think you are better than us now because your name is in a paper," one hissed outside the port. Kofi shook his head. "No, I write for us." But jealousy is a sharp blade. He learned to step carefully. Even Ato seemed distant sometimes, quiet, as if afraid Kofi might leave him behind. Kofi shared every coin, every piece of food, every chance, but insecurity spoke louder than friendship. One night, Kofi closed his notebook and said, "When I rise, you rise with me, I promise." Ato stared at him, eyes shining with gratitude. He didn't know how to speak. Months passed. Story after story printed. People across the city began asking, "Who is this boy?" Kofi eventually, a famous radio host, asked him to appear on the evening broadcast. Kofi didn't have proper clothes, but Miss Amma gave him a clean shirt and polished shoes. When he sat behind the microphone, he trembled not from fear, but from the weight of all the children who had no voice of their own. The host leaned forward. "Why do you write these stories?" Kofi looked into the microphone like it was the heart of the world. "Because suffering should not be silent," he said. "Because every child deserves a chance to be heard." Millions of radios crackled with his voice. People paused in their homes, in restaurants, in taxis. For the first time, a city listened to a boy from the streets. When the program ended, applause filled the studio. Kofi felt tears roll down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. He had earned them. Late that night, under the bridge where his journey in the city began, Kofi sat beside Ato. Cars roared above them, but the noise no longer felt threatening. "You spoke well," Ato said softly. Kofi smiled. "We spoke well. My story is your story too." Ato looked up at the stars that peeked through the cracks of the bridge. "Do you think we will ever escape this place?" he asked. Kofi didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "Not someday. Soon." He opened his notebook and wrote, "A voice can rise from anywhere, even from under a bridge." His words no longer felt like dreams, they were footsteps on a path leading somewhere brighter. And for the first time, Kofi believed he could walk that path all the way home. Sparkles. End of Chapter 3 Part 2. Next comes the final part, Part 3, Kofi's breakthrough and his triumphant return. Shall I continue? Absolutely. Here is the powerful conclusion. Chapter 3, The Rise of a Voice. Part 3, The Return of a Dream. Kofi's rise did not explode like fire. It spread slowly, like dawn. Each week his audience grew. Each month his words traveled farther. Soon, a well-known publisher visited the newspaper office, asking to meet the young writer everyone was talking about. The publisher was a tall man with smooth speech. He shook Kofi's hand. "I want to give you a book," he said. "A real book. A collection of your writings. Your journey, your truth." Kofi stared at him. "A book? Me? Yes. Your voice deserves pages that last." Kofi's heart filled with a feeling he had never known, not just hope, but arrival. He signed a contract he barely understood, trusting Miss Armour's guidance. They worked side by side editing his stories for months. Kofi poured every memory, every wound, every spark of survival into his writing. And when the book was finally released, its title shone boldly, The Boy Who Refused to Break. By Kofi M. Success surged through the city like a storm. The book sold faster than anyone expected. Schools requested copies. News reporters wanted interviews. Readers everywhere repeated his name, Kofi. Millions read about the hunger, the beatings from the gang boys, the cold nights under the bridge. They discovered the world they ignored every day. People were moved to tears. People were changed. Soon the government invited him to speak at a national event on children's rights. Kofi stepped onto a grand stage before bright lights and cameras. He looked out at a crowd dressed in perfection. And he began, "I am not here because I am special. I am here because I was seen. There are thousands who are not. Honor them. Help them. Because no child should have to shout just to be heard." Applause thundered around him. But Kofi didn't smile for himself. He smiled for every forgotten child. Money now came steadily. Enough for food. Enough for comfort. But the first thing he did with it was simple. He bought 2 bus tickets. One for himself. One for ATO. "We are going home," he told his friend. ATO blinked, disbelief trembling in his voice. "Home? After all this time?" Kofi nodded. "We survived the city. Now we go show them what survival looks like." The journey back to the village felt unreal. Trees and fields rolled by outside the bus window, the world he thought he might never see again. When they stepped off the bus, villagers recognized him instantly. Children ran ahead shouting, "Kofi is back. Kofi the writer." People rushed to surround him, praising him, touching his hands, calling his name with pride instead of judgment. But Kofi pushed through the crowd, searching for the only face that mattered. Mama stood by the small mud house, tears already running. She covered her mouth in disbelief as Kofi ran into her arms. "My son," she whispered, "my beautiful son." They held each other for a long time, a reunion made of every tear they once shed apart. When they stepped back, Mama touched his cheek gently. "You made the world listen." Kofi placed a brand new copy of his book in her hands. "I made them hear you too." Later that evening, Kofi stood in the center of the village square as everyone gathered. There was laughter, singing, pride flowing like a fresh river. And when the noise softened, Kofi spoke. Once, no one wanted to help a poor village boy. But he helped himself. He climbed until the world noticed. And now, he will make sure others do not climb alone. The villagers roared with cheers. ATO nudged him with a grin. "Look at you," he said. "You did it." Kofi looked toward the horizon where the sun met the earth, a path with no end. "No," he replied softly, "we did it." That night, Kofi wrote in a brand new notebook, "I rose so that others can rise too." The story continues. His dream had become real. His voice had become loud. And his journey from a forgotten boy in a dusty village to a storyteller embraced by the world had just begun. Because once a boy learns he cannot be broken, he becomes unstoppable. Sparkles. The end. Sparkles.